Maths is awesome, maths is fun, maths is there for everyone.
Welcome back, Year 8, to yet another exciting class of mathematics. Today we're going to be looking at lines and parallel lines and transversals. Now, we've got three special rules that we're going to have to understand. First of all, corresponding angles. Corresponding angles sometimes they're called matching angles, are equal. Alternate angles, whoops, I don't want that bit there. Alternate angles are equal. Co-interior angles add to give 180 degrees. So let's draw a diagram for each one of these. First of all, for each diagram we're going to have some parallel lines, and parallel lines are marked as being parallel by putting the little arrowheads on them. They're not parallel unless we have those arrowheads. If I put another line that crosses through them, that line that crosses through them is called the transversal. So I've got two parallel lines and I've got a transversal. Now, the corresponding angles could be those two angles there. And what you're looking for when you see corresponding angles is, and we'll do this in more detail in a moment, is a F shape. And when you look at the F shape, you can look and see underneath each of the outstretched arms of the F shape, you've got your angles that are equal. Now I can have the F going forwards or backwards or upside down, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But let's look at the alternate angles. Well, alternate angles, you need some parallel lines. You need a line that goes through them. It's called a transversal. And with parallel lines with alternate angles, these two angles are equal. And what you're looking for with alternates are Z shapes. And hopefully you can see a Z shape there. And if you can see a Z shape, when you look at the Zs, those two angles are equal to each other. They're the same as each other. For co-interior angles, we have two parallel lines. We have our transversal. And we have two angles. Now I'm going to put one with a cross and one with a circle. And I'll say the cross and the circle, when you add them together, give 180 degrees. And what you're looking at for with co-interior angles is it's like a C shape. And the two angles inside the C shape are not equal to each other, but the two angles, when you plus them together, add up to give 180 degrees. Let's try our examples. The first example. For the first example, it says to mark in the corresponding angle. Now, there's actually a mistake in the booklet here, but there's some corresponding angles. So I'm going to mark in this angle and this angle. Why are they corresponding? Because I can see an F shape. And if you can see an F shape, those two are the same. I could also draw the F shape as a backwards F. And if that was the case, those two angles are corresponding because the F shape's upside down. I could draw the F upside down. And if the F was upside down, those two angles would be the corresponding angles. And I could also, and I'm actually going to do this here, this is actually for part of the corresponding, I'm going to use this one down here. I could draw the F shape so that it was down and went that way. And I've got an F shape, which means those two angles, if if you look at the F from upside down, turn the page if you like, they are corresponding, so they are equal to each other. There's 4 different ways you can have corresponding angles, depending on how your F shape goes. Now with part B, we're dealing with alternate angles. And there are only 2 types of alternate angle questions, and alternate angles work with having a Z shape. There's a Z shape, or I can have my Z shape backwards. Now, there's one thing I didn't mention with this. Every single one of these questions, it's assumed, and they should be marked on and they weren't, that the lines are parallel. And when you have parallel lines, there should be arrowheads on them. So that's actually a mistake not to have them there. Now, if you have alternate angles, look on the inside of the Zs, that one there and that one there, they are the same as equal or equal to each other. If the Z is backwards, those 2 are the same or equal to each other. So there's 4 types of corresponding angle questions. There's 2 types of alternate angle questions. And when we go to the co-interior angle, the first thing I'm going to do is put my little arrowheads on to say that those lines are parallel. Co-interior angles use a C shape. So I can have a C shape that goes that way, or I could have a C shape that's backwards. And if I have a C shape, I'll call the angles A and B, or I could call it A and B for that one, and A plus B has to add to give 180 degrees because co-interior angles, both angles add to give 180. Let's go to our second example, and it says state whether the following pairs of marked angles are corresponding, alternate or co-interior. Corresponding would be using the F shape. Alternate, using the Z shape. Co-interior, using the square C shape. Now remember, the shapes could be backwards or upside down or anything. So if I look at part A, that is, if I turn the page 90 degrees to the right, I can see, or to the left, I can see a Z shape, which means A and B are alternate and they're equal to each other. For part B, I can see a Z shape, and on the inside of the Z parts, I can see that those 2 are equal. So A and B are alternate. For part C, I've got to make sure my shape includes the A or the B. So A and B, when I draw my shape in, are there and there. That's a C shape, which is co-interior. So those angles are not equal to each other. Those 2 angles plus together to give 180. For part D, I can see the angle A and the angle B occur there, and that is a bit like a sideways backwards F shape. There's my angle going under and under, and if they're F shapes, they're called corresponding angles, and they would be equal to each other. For part E, I'll draw a line down there, go across there and across there. What shape is that? Well, that's an upside down and backward F shape, which is corresponding. If you turn your page upside down, you'll see that hopefully. Now, every single one of these questions had the little arrowheads so we could see where the parallel lines are. With part F, bit of a square looking C turned sideways, which means they are co-interior. So they are our answers to example 2. Example 3, find the value of the pronumerals. Now, just so you can see it, that there is actually like a capital O with a line through it. It's actually pronounced theta, and it's a letter from the Greek alphabet. We often use it when we're talking about an unknown angle. So, in this particular question, if I look at it, I can see I've got a line that's going across there. If I go up that way and up that way, I can see that those two angles follow the lines going up, and that's a sideways backward F, which means they are corresponding, so I can say theta equals 140 degrees because they are corresponding angles. Remember my abbreviation for angles? And corresponding angles are equal all the time. If I go to part B, I've got to look for my shape. Well, I can see that 130 is there, A is there. That is a sideways backwards F shape. And the sideways backward F shape means A equals 130 degrees, and the F shape is when angles are corresponding, and corresponding angles are equal. For part C, I've got one angle here, another angle there. That is a C shape. So I would go theta plus 132 equals 180 because C shape are co-interior. Co-interior angles add to 180 degrees. And with this particular question, I'm minus 132 to both sides, which means theta equals 180 take away 32 is 48 degrees. Now if I go to part D, it's a bit tricky, but that 120 degree angle is this one here, and A is that one there. So I've got an angle created there, an angle created there, and that is a Z shape that's a bit sideways and a bit weird, but Z shapes are alternate angles and they're equal. So A equals 120 degrees because they are alternate angles. Alternate and corresponding, Z's and F's, they're easy because you can just go straight to writing the answer down. It's the C shapes that require a little bit extra working out. Now with part E, that 110 degrees is a bit misleading, so let's pretend the 110 degrees was in this position here and the A was in this position here, because 110 doesn't really clearly show where it is. So there's the 110, there's the A, and if that's the case, I've got another funny sideways looking Z type shape. Z shapes are alternate and alternate angles are equal. So A equals 110, and why? Because they are alternate angles and alternate angles are equal. Part F. Now, part F, I can see my two angles. So I've got one angle coming in there, that's the 115, another one there, that's a C shape. C shapes were the trickier ones. A plus 115 equals 180. Why? Because they are co-interior angles, and co-interior angles add to 180 degrees, which means I now have to minus 115 to both sides. So A equals 180, take away 115, which is 65 degrees. We go to part G. For part G, I can see my angle 64 degrees is there. My angle A degrees is there. That's a backward C shape. C shapes were the trickier ones because they add up to give 180. And what's the reason? They're co-interior angles. Co-interior angles add to 180 degrees. That's minus 64 to both sides. And 180 take away 64 is 116 degrees. Now example 4 is a little bit different. It says, giving reasons, state whether the two lines cut by the transversal are parallel. Are they parallel? It's not saying they are, it says, are they parallel? Well, let's have a look at the two angles. There's one angle, there's the other angle. That's an upside down backward F shape, but they're not equal to each other. So if they're not equal to each other, I'm going to say not parallel, because they are not, that's an F shape, and F shapes are corresponding. Corresponding angles have to be equal. They're not parallel because the angles that are in a corresponding position are not equal. So probably worded that, I could have maybe worded that a bit better. I could have said they're not parallel because the corresponding angles are not equal. That might have been a better way to write it. Let's go to part B. When I look at part B, I can see a line. If I go up and down, I've got two angles that are created, and those angles are the same. That's a Z shape. So I'm going to say they are parallel. I have alternate angles of 81 degrees. So because both of those angles are 81 and they're in the Z shape or the alternate position, the lines are parallel. So I could actually say that line there and that line there are parallel. Let's go to part C. For part C, I'm looking at a C shape, and since 100 plus 60 equals 160, they are not parallel because they are not co-interior. Co-interiors add up to give 180 degrees, not 160 degrees. Well, it's time for you to try some questions in your book. As always, enjoy. Bye for now.